In recent months, quite a few people have asked me about how I choose to label my own worldview. Are you a conservative, alt-right, a classical liberal? The truth is I don't find myself falling into any one of the common labels that are often bandied about online. And it's not that I consider myself beyond labels or some kind of free thinker. I am actually quite fond of ideological labels, since they're useful rules of thumb, and handy to have in a conversation. Rather, I don't accept most labels because they don't accurately express the core of my beliefs, or even the ideology that I seek to propound on my YouTube channel. I oftentimes describe myself as a Western traditionalist. However, I have noticed that people find this term less than useful. Isn't this just the alt-right? The alt-light? Don't you mean neoconservative or paleoconservative? Indeed, I have to admit that the label is not very clear. So recently, I took 15 minutes to write down the key components of what I thought characterized this Western traditionalist worldview. I found that the initials I wrote formed an acronym outlined in 5 points. C.L.E.A.R. Clear. So in my mind at least, Western traditionalism is clear. Western traditionalism is Christendom, not capitalism, communism, or any other political ideology. Cultural values precede the political means by which we achieve those values. I start first and foremost from the morals of the Western philosophers, the spirituality of the ancient prophets, and Christ, who embodied both these morals and spirituality. Although not all people who share this principle are Christians, or even religious, all recognize that political considerations and sociological models proceed secondarily from their consideration in light of an ethical and spiritual tradition, and our ethical tradition is that outlined in Christ's Sermon on the Mount. Traditionalism is lived, not LARPed or lulz. Traditionalism is a lived and living cultural force. It is not an ironic act adopted for humor, nor a fantastical affectation designed to augment delusions of grandeur. Western traditionalists live, or actively seek to live, in the communities that embody their professed ethics. These communities start foremost with the family unit that binds men and women to their offspring, and filter upward through the sundry communities that support a moral society. While seemingly more about lifestyle than dialectic, this principle fundamentally extends 2 core elements of honest discourse. 1, the belief that words have true meaning, and 2, the principle that one should live by the ideas he or she promotes. To borrow a Victorian turn of phrase, one should strive to say what they mean, and mean what they say. Western traditionalism is ethical, not ethnically particular or existentialist. Western traditionalists are moral realists and reject relativism of both the cultural and individual variety. This rejection includes the existentialist notion that individuals can forge their own ethics from whole cloth, or that morality is constricted in between particular human cultures. Although the principles espoused permeate the culture of Europe, Western traditionalism is not exclusive to Europe. It is not something that cannot be asserted or adopted by another culture or race. To paraphrase and partially invert Hilaire Belloc, Europe is the tradition, but the tradition is not Europe. Western traditionalism is an ageless spiritual tradition, not a traditionalist spirit of the age. Western traditionalists believe in individual agency in the light of a rational and discernible notion of goodness. We reject the Hegelian notion of historic inevitability. We reject the progressive assumption that successive circumstances are naturally better by virtue of their later occurrence. And we reject the utilitarian proposition that goodness can be measured mechanistically through some vague concept of utility. Traditionalists understand that the future must be actively strived for using the timeless knowledge of the good. We are not slaves endlessly tearing down the customs that give our lives meaning in the name of a utopia that will never come about. We are the authors of our lives and vanguards of the morality which gives those lives meaning and purpose. Western traditionalism is Renaissance, not reaction. Western traditionalism is a realist worldview that fights for the future. It is not a knee-jerk reaction or a sentimental nostalgia. Although we value and treasure the past as something that is real, as opposed to the purely hypothetical vision of the future, we understand that the past is, like all human things, imperfect. Moral responsibility exists in the present, where our actions lie, and the future, where our will is directed. As such, we neither seek to entome the knowledge of the past into a hollowed, golden age, or return to some primordial state of innocence. Morality is about action, and Western traditionalists are activists for their cause. I have been using this handy acronym for a while, and it has turned out to be quite useful. I am certainly not the first person to invent or discover these principles. In fact, most of the people in my church and many of the people that I regularly talk with online would wholeheartedly agree with all of these statements. The concepts are simple, straightforward, and common sense. But still, when taken as a whole, most modern ideological communities, especially those on the internet, not only cannot assent to these principles, but are utterly opposed to their adoption in the modern world. Some even take particular pride in setting themselves in opposition to one, if not all of these principles. And this, when one thinks about it, is incredibly odd. All 5 of these principles, in their entirety, and in the fullest extent which I have explained them here, and even further, would have been unanimously consented to by any Westerner at any other time prior to our own. Man, woman, or child, from Iceland to the furthest reaches of Asian Christendom, from 500 AD to 1965, these principles would have been asserted as readily as they were understood. And perhaps this is why, as obvious as any of these concepts are to myself and those more old-fashioned among us, their collection has no name. It is because until very recently, these principles meant, and were held to be equivalent to, being a man or woman of the West. They never needed a name because they were so ubiquitous. They were as transparent as the air outside, and just as obvious. So now, as the principles fade, maybe some people might finally see them, or they may forever be too effervescent to grasp, in their entirety, destined to fade into the background without ever being fully named. At this point in the video, I would like to extend an additional challenge to anyone who has persisted in watching. I feel strongly that these principles form a dividing line between categories of contemporary ideas, separating the classic from the modern. As such, one can ask themselves if their own worldview falls within the bounds. I would argue this tells you something. Accept the principles, and you fall in the broad tradition of the West. Reject one or all of them vehemently, and your philosophy is most likely a native child of modernity. So I will ask all my viewers, does your personal philosophy fall into this framework? Is your philosophy in the clear?